Uh, Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our January 29th, 2024, Monday morning work session. Our focus today is to a presentation from Mark Pfaffinger, our Support Services Director, regarding some of our internal services, in particular as they relate to current use of artificial intelligence, future uses, opportunities, challenges, and I think fundamentally to help us as commissioners better understand this tool that we're currently using and has potential for greater use in the future. My name is John Kafalis, Commissioner from District 1, Chair. I'm joined by my Commissioner colleagues, Kristen Stevens from District 2 and Jody Shattuck McNally from District 3. And of course, we are joined by our County Manager down at the other end, Lorenda Volker. At this time, I'll see if Lorenda wants to make any comments, but otherwise we'll turn it over to our guests.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. I'm anxious to see this. I've seen the slides and I've heard a little bit about this presentation. We've had a lot of questions from the public, from you all, from department heads about the proper and appropriate use of AI, and so artificial intelligence, AI. And so Mark and Gregg thought a little demonstration about what is possible, the benefits and some of the concerns we have would be a great place to start. This is one of our strategic plan objectives, is to really create a policy around this. And so I think we're kicking off our strategic plan today, ironically, even though we have not yet quite adopted it, with the kind of an introduction on AI and what it means to the county. So I'll hand it over to the two of you and we'll go.
Thank you, Lorenda. Good morning, colleagues.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. Mark Pfaffinger, Support Services Director and CIO. We appreciate you taking time today to go through this journey with us. Hopefully at the end, you'll see the positive sides of where we can take things, but also, we're going to have a little bit of a roller coaster ride of emotions, I think, as we go through the reality of what we're dealing with this emerging technology. As you know, I've been in the IT space many years, over 30 years, and the pace of change I'm seeing in relation to what the computing power has been able to do to revolutionize how we interact with systems to automatically create content, manipulate information, is kind of staggering. It's exciting and also a little bit frightening. And so I think taking a measured approach and a conscious effort to be aware and thoughtful about how we allow these solutions to enter our organization will really dictate the successes we see in terms of how we interact with the AI emerging technologies in the world today. So hopefully at the end of this, you'll have a better sense of some of the issues involved, where we think the power of this can really enable and improve services to our residents, which is ultimately our goal. We're trying to improve our resident services, the speed of delivery of things. And I think this isn't going to happen overnight. I think a lot of what you'll hear in the news is it's already here, it's already good to go. There's a lot of still rough edges and issues with these platforms and technologies, but they're exciting and intriguing. So I have with me Gregg Turnbull, our Innovation and Insights Director. He's helping me keep ahead of a lot of these kinds of technologies and is quite involved regionally and nationally in a bunch of efforts to stay linked to how we all as an organization, a community, work together to make sure these technologies are used in a productive and thoughtful way. So a lot of this will be a little education because I think it's good to baseline where we're at, but also at the end we're going to do a little demoing and kind of show you real world examples of how these tools can be used, and then talk a little bit about what our path forward and see if you were aligned on some of the suggestions we have on how we can keep moving forward. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Gregg.
Nice. Thank you for having us. Gregg Turnbull with IT. As you notice us trying to put this together, make the laptop work the way we wanted to, technology is always humbling us at some point. And this is no different at all. How AI and how AI has come on the scene, it's very explosive. There's a lot of movement, and especially for folks that have been engaged. Myself, I've been very laser focused on the digital, how we work with the residents and our partners through the web and through other services. And this is a new horizon for us, especially with what our expectations are and a lot of our responsibilities and how we have to move forward. So as Mark said, we'll break this into a couple sections. So the agenda for today is we're going to do just a brief review of AI and generative AI as a whole. We'll do some examples. We'll go through just a really brief history of what we've seen. And I'm saying it's a really brief history because it really didn't become this huge explosion happened in November of the year before last. So let's see, 2022.
Yep.
And when ChatGPT and OpenAI made public their solution. We'll go through some existing AI that we have at Larimer County. It's not new to us. We're using AI in a lot of our services. And then we'll talk a little bit about risks within this generative space. And then once we scare everyone and we bring it all, we'll talk about some paths forward that we can do as a county, as a community with this AI, with generative AI. So, as I mentioned, we'll start with number one.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, we're open to questions along the way. I think we've structured it that we have a little room
Yeah,
here for
and
dialogue.
we'll strike a balance there. I just wanted to make sure, Greg, based on what you just shared, will you also be providing a quick update on the survey results? I think there was you that sent
Yes.
out
and it's
a
not on
quick
the slide,
little-
but I'll get you we'll pull some numbers.
I'm
And
curious.
Yes, we put the presentation together, and I've been letting that run. And yeah, we'll get some feedback from, and mostly just the sentiment. I'm really interested in how our staff are looking at AI, how many people are using it. I do have some numbers from real-time examples from our firewall, because every time they hit these services, we monitor and we have numbers on their utility there as well. So thank you for that. Okay, so as part of the work that we find in this space is we have to come to a definition first of what AI is. The White House actually very recently, October of this last year, they came up with an anchor for the folks that are working in this space. So I'll just read through it. The term artificial intelligence, or AI, has the meaning set forth in 15 USC 94013. A machine-based system that can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, make predictions, recommendations, or decisions influencing real or virtual environments. Artificial intelligence systems use machine and human-based inputs to perceive real and virtual environments, abstract such perceptions into models through analysis in an automated manner, and use model inference to formulate opinions and information or action. So there's a mouthful there. But the idea is that it's the human-defined objectives, given the human making these objectives, this system is going to work to make predictions, recommendations, or even decisions. So it takes the human to start the ball rolling. And these systems respond to that. So most of the systems we're talking about, ChatGPT, Pi, or other systems, it engages with the human being. And that can be great because it's responding and it's adapting to what that human needs. But also there's a lot of problems that can be introduced. And we'll go through some of those problems later in the presentation. But the only other note I'd say is we're part of a collaborative, which we'll talk about. Now it's 140 different government agencies. So having one definition to work from turned out to be a very important place to start. So. Okay, so the first thing we want to talk about, that before like that November timeframe of a year and a half ago, roughly, we had a lot of systems internal that their whole role was to use AI to classify data, or to give us insights or prescriptions of things that we were doing. We have the BI team that does big data work all the time, and we use AI as a component throughout IT. But when generative AI hit the scene, it kind of flipped the script. And then it became, can you create something for me? Can you draw me a picture? Can you draw me a blueprint? Can you create music for me? So that's the type of AI that generative AI is. We'll do a little bit more history that I talked about. So these ideas were set in the 1940s. And growing up with Star Wars and every other robot under the sun, I was very excited. I thought, I'm going to be the guy to build something like this. Kind of got me into IT. But even then, it's taken a very long time to get to the point where we have these systems that are talking to us and relating to us and being empathetic. So what it took was time, a lot of data, and computing power. So it just takes a while for the technology to catch up with the ideas. So folks in 1940 had this vision, and it took a while to get there. And generative AI can create any content based on a prompt. You'll hear prompts quite a bit in generative AI. We're talking text, images, video, voice, maps. They can generate architecture. An example we talked about is when you're telling a story to your kid and you say, once upon a time, and your child immediately envisions what's the next phrase. And everyone in the room probably had an idea of what's the next. When I say once upon a time, in a castle lived a, in your brain you start to envision what that is. These systems work very similarly because the human brain's ability to take the next step, it's just that on these bigger systems, which the ChatGPT in 3.5 was by 175 billion nodes, a small version. Now we're all the way up to 100 trillion, which is on par with what the human brain can do. Its capability that the old version, it could beat 10% of students taking the bar exam. The new version beats out 90+% of the students taking the bar exam. So very capable. I didn't know if you wanted to.
We mentioned the word prompt. I think that's something that's a vocabulary word you should understand. When you're interacting with systems, you're writing requests of the computer through what's called a prompt. And it's usually in some sort of natural language type sentence that you write. The prompt really has a lot to do with how accurate the results come back. And so a lot of learning that's happening right now. In Google, we know how to search the internet using Google. We've been doing that for 10 years. What's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years is Google's going to get replaced by AI chat prompts. And so you're going to write prompts in a way that gets you best results. And so that's something that we'll be touching on, we'll showing examples of today also.
Yes, Commissioner.
A couple of things. First, we've used Chat GPT last year when we had a sudden death in the family, and we're all sitting around too grieved to try to write an obituary or something, right? So one of the younger folks had said, "Hey, let's try this," and we all half a dozen of us, and it was surprising how it kind of helped us get started.
Mm-hmm.
We end up expanding it, making it more, but it really was spot on when we put all the different things in, and it was a useful tool, and so I thought that was really interesting. Also, on my personal computer, I was asked through Google as by Gmail and stuff to be a participant in their AI experiment. I don't know if other people have heard that.
Bard, yeah.
What's it called?
Bard.
And so I found that interesting, and so I've been kind of, I wanted to engage because I was just curious, and so
Yeah.
it has been interesting. But I just wanted to say, I think there's a lot of people who, there's some of those things, that, you didn't think you'd ever use it, but it came in a time, kind of handy. So I just wanted to kind of share that story because I think those are kind of some of the things people are maybe using it for, just to help prompt them to do something more. So anyway, thanks.
No, absolutely.
You're welcome. As an example, that's a mention of prompt. If you just ask the system, write me an obituary, it's pretty boring and flat. If you prompt it with a lot of data that's relatable to the person, you're giving it a lot of sentiment in terms of what kind of individual you're interacting with, it's able to make many more connections within the neural network of these generative systems to provide a better output. And so a lot of the examples of a successful use of generative AI has to do with how accurate your prompt writing is. There's actually a new field right now called prompt engineer that's emerging in the IT space. If any of your kids are interested in a cool job, you can become a prompt engineer. So if you're good at law school but you're technical, you might be thinking of a new career change right now. The other thing that's allowed this to happen is the emergence of new hardware technology. There's things called GPU chips. Those have very powerful capabilities of running mathematical calculations. Big companies like NVIDIA and Google are building these chips into massive arrays, which allow them to create the connections between information fast enough that they're usable. 10 years ago would have taken a whole day to run a request from a computer and get useful results back. Now it's happening in seconds. And so I think we'll get into some examples that'll kind of make this more, bring it to light for you all.
Yeah. One more note on that, the chase for Bitcoin, all the money, people just chasing that money really helped this whole area as well, because those CPUs became more, the power with those. So,
Okay.
thank you. Yeah. We talk a little bit about hype. As we mentioned, you'll start to see these every other news article. It'll be Taylor Swift, and then it will be ChatGPT, or vice versa. There'll be a high degree of AI. And as IT, we're very familiar with some of these patterns. Mark and I sat in the room and we started to think about what are we so used to hearing about, and so smart cities and big data. None of those things have gone away. We're still working in those spaces. It's just where they fall on this peak. And ChatGPT is interesting because it's such a fast rise to the peak, and it doesn't show, at least not right now, any leveling out or any dropping right now. There's still so much utility, so many groups that are entering the arena, and there's just a lot of use that's being shown.
Many of the AI technologies are currently at about the peak or just coming past the peak of overinflated expectation, which usually leads, if you're not familiar with this chart, there's typically a lot of hype that comes first. Then the trough of disillusionment hits, which is the reality sets in, and it's not going to do everything. It's not going to make your toast in the morning. So therefore, it's not as cool as you thought it was going to be. But as you emerge out of that trough of disillusionment, it starts to become the slope of enlightenment, where it actually starts to provide a lot of business value, a lot of community value. We're still coming over that peak of inflated expectations right now. And so the hype around AI couldn't be any higher than it was maybe 6 months ago. As you're starting to see, it's waning a little bit right now. As we start to dip down into this trough and people go, wow, it's cool, but it didn't do everything I wanted to do yet. So that's kind of where we're at on this hype cycle right now.
We have one more hype cycle just to show. It gives a little bit of like comparative technologies like self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles, computer-aided vision, showcasing some of these technologies and where at least Gardner, one of the agencies we work with, where they see these technologies at right now. And AI, generative AI, is right up there at the peak.
So every one of these dots is a form of artificial intelligence. And so when you talk artificial intelligence, a lot of people just assume generative AI. And so the problem is there's so many fields and professions embedded into this space called artificial intelligence that the folks that really are in this area know that it could be everything from autonomous vehicles all the way over to generative AI, smart robotics. There's lots of things. And one of the cool things is you are starting to see that autonomous vehicle starting to emerge right now out of that trough of disillusionment, which means we could actually see some radical changes in the use of these types of vehicles in the next 5 to 10 years. Whereas generative AI is right at the very top of this hype cycle. The little bit scary thing is there's an updated chart on generative AI. It's already halfway down the trough of disillusionment. It's moving faster through this hype cycle than any technology I've seen in the recent history. And so we could be we could actually be using these in meaningful, effective ways in the next year or so if it keeps going at the pace it's going. Yeah.
So we thought just to showcase some examples of generative AI. This is through a tool called Midjourney. And one of the ideas, like high-speed rail. I know that's, a topic of conversation. So I said, hey, draw me a picture of high-speed rail through Larimer County, Colorado, with mountains in the background. And that's the picture it drew.
And how long did that take to draw?
All of 1 sec. It's faster than me typing it in. Or based on other county buildings, I said, give me a new county administrative building in Larimer County, Colorado. What might that look like? So what's interesting about this and other prompts that you might give is it takes no time at all to say, I don't like that, let's try it again. Or let's modify it just a little bit. Let's make it 4 stories. Or let's make, show me a specific, mountain mountain range in the background. But all of that back and forth, it becomes a partnership with you and this AI. Maybe getting a little bit closer every time. But the idea of having a blank page, that's what's interesting to me is I remember writing papers in college, I had that blank page in front of me. And that might not be the case with most people now. It might be, hey, start this. And I know a lot of education's now starting to lean in on that with generative AI. So, just a few more examples. A prompt to expand the Mona Lisa. So take the Mona Lisa and expand the
So the
image.
original picture's in that original outline, and it tried to assume or guess what the rest of the picture might look like. And you're seeing this a lot right now in some of the news articles today.
Expand the Beatles' White Album. It knew the Beatles, so you see a yellow submarine in there. And then here's one specifically. So I said, write a short poem on the benefits provided to the residents of Larimer County by the Larimer County government. Note the wisdom of the commissioners. And we'll see how we did. In Larimer's lands, where mountains rise, where nature's beauty never dies, there lies a governance, oh so wise, a beacon under Colorado skies, with roads that wind and parks that please, safety, health, and minds at ease. Their decisions made to appease the needs of all like a gentle breeze. So here's to those who guide the way in sunlit morn or evenings gray. Their wisdom shines, come what may, blessing residents day by day. So like you said, ChatGPT doesn't do a bad job.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
If I may, a quick question, colleagues, and that is on this particular slide. My question is, so if we as commissioners or someone else in the organization made a request or went to the proper website to produce something like this, before it goes out, I presume that we as commissioners or someone else in the organization would have final say in what this looks like before it goes out.
Sure.
Can you speak to that, please?
And I think part of that is what kind of crescendo will be the policy part and the guidelines. And to say, how do we work with this system and what safeguards can we put in place? We'll definitely dive more into like what the dangers are of this. Because is it accurate? Who owns the content? There's certain things that we have to be mindful of. And
I think at a simpler level is, at a higher level, I think what you're asking, when you ask for a result, it's just like a web search. It brings back the content on your screen. You can cut and paste that into a Word document and then manipulate it before you put it on your website. It doesn't automatically post anywhere. So
Right.
you're using it as a tool, like a Word document creator, first before you decide to put it somewhere like on a public website.
but there is very recent in the news folks that have released these things as chatbots, where people have engaged with them and they've turned on their company and said terrible things about their company in a chat version. So they're already out there. There's folks that are already out there making bad decisions with the technology versus the things that we need to kind of focus on as an organization. Oh, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. So, as an example, we've got a few, and the audio, I may be in a spot because I don't know if we have a way to capture audio over
I
the,
think it shows up.
okay, let's try it. Over HDMI, we'll try
Yep.
it.
I think it does.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, and make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel? I would like to welcome you to the era of synthetic reality. Now, what do you see?
So,
I am not Morgan Freeman.
by that slide. That's just a a real brief example of somebody taking something and creating video. And we've seen that. We talked about deep fakes on phone calls with President Biden in New Hampshire. Another piece of this, we talk about what else can this tool do better than now that it's AI. It used to be very accurate. It used to be high, like the chess player, the big blue, IBM used to be the best chess player in the world. And now we're seeing technology that's more empathetic than human beings. This is John Hopkins data showing that not only was ChatGPT had a higher prevalence of quality, but now they're showing that they have a 980% higher prevalence of empathy when dealing with patients. So we've got an example of an AI technology here, and I'll try to hold it up to the phone.
It's my understanding is you pointed AI at our website, and you which collects a lot of data about our public website. And
Right.
then we basically trained a chatbot to interact with Gregg about asking questions of information from the county.
Yep. And this is, her name's Pi. It was a technology that's currently being developed by LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman. And this is just an example of working with some data that we have readily available. But this conversation might sound familiar. Hello, Pi. I just received a letter from Larimer County telling me that I have to change my road name, and I'm not very happy about it. Whom should I contact about that problem?
Oh dear, that doesn't sound like a pleasant surprise, Gregg. If you've received a letter from Larimer County instructing you to change your road name, the best course of action is to contact the Larimer County addressing team directly. You can reach them by phone at 9970-498-5.22 or by email at larimer@addressinglarimer.gov. They should be able to provide you with more information about why your road name needs to be changed and help you understand your options for addressing, pun intended, your concerns. Remember, it's always best to reach out to the relevant authorities directly when you have a concern about an official notice or request. That way, you can get the most accurate and up-to-date information about what's happening and what you can do about it.
So,
So one thing I'll notice in some of these voices, they've really done a lot of effort in trying to put the language in to make the person sound empathetic. These chatbots never get tired. They never wear out from getting hammered over and over with questions like normal human beings might. And so I don't know what your experience was listening to that. Did that seem like a believable and empathetic response to the question?
Is that a rhetorical question, or you'd like us to
I
respond?
think I'd like you to respond.
Well, colleagues, you have an opportunity to respond to a rhetorical question. Commissioner Stevens.
I didn't understand the phone number. Was there like a weird?
there was a problem with how
Dollar
she
sign?
read the phone number, and it could be based on how that information is encoded.
Okay, and also, the last couple words were weirdly put.
Yeah. And
Not that a human being couldn't say something odd, but that it felt
A little
there was
casual.
some awkwardness, I guess, in the last two words, a few words.
And I think that the one thing I've read about this is you think of it as not an all-knowing sage, but potentially as almost like an intern or someone that's working to better provide information. So there's tuning that's always happening on those. But you can always ask a follow-up question, like, hey, can I get that phone number again? And there's also the ability to get it in print as well, versus how it's said over print. But that just, again, shows you unscripted example of engaging with one of these systems.
Commissioner, please.
I was kind of surprised. I mean, the voice sounded pretty natural, but I was very surprised how quickly it came up with a pun. Because everyone likes to have a giggle about something, but that would make the person a little more at ease. But I was surprised, it took a few seconds, but I was surprised they put a pun or a joke in there. That was pretty interesting.
Yeah, we were too, because we've tested this a couple times and she'd never done that before.
That was the first time she did the pun.
And Gregg, I also wish to comment,
Yes, absolutely.
respond to the rhetorical question. A couple of things that popped into my head. One is, regarding the slide, chatbot versus doctor, there was an interesting story on NPR a couple of weeks ago about this topic. And so I just wanted to put that out there. But I'm curious, when you talk to your phone, did you go to a website? Why did you assign a gender to your friend Pi? And then I have a more substantive questions around the empathy thing. I'll do that. Okay. So I think one of the cautions that I would offer, and I'm sure you're thinking about this as well, being, quote, mindful, and that is, is it conceivable that if we rely more and more on generative artificial intelligence to help us with understanding and expressing empathy, does that reduce our responsibility as human beings to actually learn how we can get better at understanding and expressing empathy? What do you make of that, sir?
So as a thought, one of the things I think even in IT that, and because coming out and being in technology very early on, empathy wasn't one of the high level goals. It was what you knew and the technology and how you could engage. But as an organization, we've really focused on empathy and how we deal with our customers. So if I've ever, just being in that space, one of the things I've seen is that the more empathy present, I think it grows empathy on both sides of the equation. And I could be wrong, but if I'm working with something that's cold or hard or just fact based, I intend to mirror that. And I could be wrong, but that's just so far dealing with the things is once I start seeing something that's empathetic, it takes on a persona. And the nice thing when I can choose whether it's a female, a male, whether it's has an accent, whether it's British, like, you know, if I want to be Tony Stark, I can get a British speaking agent. But yeah, that's just my thought on it. I don't know if you have feelings on empathy. That's my.
Well, I think it's a really interesting question because I think it could mask empathy when you're dealing with the public. Sometimes takes a lot of professional will to be present with the person having the problem and be able to interact. And some of the departments that have constant walk up and customers, it can be hard. I think we joke our empathy tank is getting a little low. We say that in IT as a conversation. Sometimes when we're kind of dealing with a lot of difficult conversations day over day, our tanks can get drawn down a little bit, and sometimes we can find ourselves being a little bit quicker with our answers instead of being listeners and open and engaging. And so my thought is, how could these tools potentially take on the front line so when you actually need to get escalated to the folks, a majority of the common questions have been answered, so we can be retaining our empathy quotient more for the people we have to interact with. So I see it potentially being a risk, but I also see it potentially helping us as well.
Well, I appreciate that, and just one additional thought on this particular topic, and that is, I could see the potential benefits with, for example, your kind of folks, IT folks, engineering comes to mind when you're very focused on the technical aspects of things, and sometimes it becomes harder to understand and express the empathy aspect of things. So I think there can be a potential benefit there, but I'm just very cautious about, are we all going to, just like we do now, we rely on our phones for everything. We don't know how to do simple arithmetic anymore. We just use the calculator. Yeah. Could that spill over into this, what I think is a fundamental thing about being a human being, and that is empathy. So that's all I have to say. Did you have something, Commissioner, please?
Well, I was just thinking, when you talked about responding to, customers and things, and I agree with you, Commissioner. I tend to try to, dial people's phone numbers instead of trying to just trying to keep my brain activated. But when you're on hold a long time and you hear that repetitive message, I could see AI to kind of say, hey, I understand it's frustrating to be on hold this long, or, it's going to be a few minutes before a person can ask, is there some information I can gather before you talk to the person, or they have it in front of you? Because I don't know, I had this experience where I had to repeat the same information to 3 human beings, and that was so frustrating. And I can see some of the value in that to kind of keep people on the phone, or someone who's waiting kind of feeling like they're not just sitting there in perpetual, hold, and help them feel like someone cares or something. But I do agree that, there's caution. When we were, Commissioner Stevens and I were at the Capitol Conference last summer, with all of our senators and other senators and thought leaders from across the university systems, this was a big talk, was AI and the concern. And what are the potential policies and how do we be careful so it doesn't spill over to what things that we want or don't want to happen. And so I know this is a conversation I've been having ever since, and it was certainly a concern about what is, there's benefits and pros, but everyone's really worried about the cons. And
We haven't even got to those slides yet.
Yeah, I know.
we're
So I
gonna-
just thought I'd
We're
just
gonna
send-
really,
We're still on the positive slides.
still-
Oh, I know, but I just think there are some uses, but yeah, I could see that, so.
sure.
And I would respectfully ask that you gauge your presentation, knowing that I'd like to be done certainly by noon, if not sooner. Thank you. And I believe that extends to the three of us, ideally.
Yes,
Oh, we're well on track right now.
yeah.
Can I get a clarification? I thought we were only
11:30.
here till 11:30,
Yep.
and so I have an 11:30, so.
11:30.
Yeah, that's what I meant, 10 to 11.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, just to show a few more examples of the generative AI aspect, just the ability to create music from 5 notes. So that's Chopin. So 5 notes of Chopin, run through AI, it can generate everything you hear there.
So the first 5 notes were fed in, and then it tried to fill in what would happen after.
So really, we're just showing like the extremes of this. Any content that could be created can be generated from tools like this. Get to the next slide. All right, so we've done some examples just of what generative AI is. We just want to do a real quick review of some AI systems that are in place at Larimer County. So we currently use this to fine-tune web content. Web editors will jump on, they'll use either ChatGPT or even built-in systems to refine phrases to make sure our target is to have for an 8th grade reading level. And that's just to try and make sure that those, no matter, whoever needs county services has access to those and can work with our content. That's not to say that all the content on our website is currently written that way, but we have systems that will monitor and try to guide folks to say, hey, this is written at a college level. Maybe we need to revise this. Down below, we use it for search. So people are searching for certain things on our website. One, we use AI to guide that search. We also monitor those searches to see maybe we're missing something. Or maybe there's something that they're looking for on our site that maybe we need to guide them elsewhere. A big example is a driver's license. They come to our site and say, where do I go to get my driver's license? And right away, we can direct them to the state or another agency. Translation, I think we've talked about a little bit before. We have real-time translation on our site, and we also have the ability for a human being to step in and fine-tune and revise that translation when it absolutely will be wrong. The system is only so good, it will translate it automatically, and then we use a human being that can then revise it in real time. So those are just a few examples on larimer.gov. Did you have any thoughts or comments?
Yes, I do. And since we've been assured that we're on track and we clarified that we're till 11:30, thank you, Commissioner. My comment question on this particular slide, so there's a renewed emphasis on knowing our audiences and therefore determining what is plain language to that audience. And it gets back to the 8th grade reading level, like newspapers were supposed to be. And my question is this. So I know when I've had conversations with staff about plain language and what are the tools that are out there, for example, in our Climate Smart Future Ready, we looked at a comparison, and there were particular apps that were doing this, although I wasn't very pleased with what this app produced. And so I think the question is this: if we're relying more on AI, which I think does a better job so far, what I've seen, does that mean that the companies, the people who produce these apps are going to go out of business and lose their jobs?
It could happen. And or they adapt. It's very similar to other times in history where we were relying on counting houses full of people that just did calculation. And then, like you mentioned earlier, the calculator comes along, and now everyone has it in their pocket. Or people that produced film, photography, Kodak. And then again, the phone stepped in and made those changes. So absolutely, we have to be mindful of the economic impact of these technologies.
And certainly on the employment front, mindful of how it might impact employees in our organization.
Sure,
Yes, thank you.
absolutely. A real quick review of some of the AI protections that we lean on in security. Continuous email monitoring and training. So right now, we've all probably seen something hit our inbox that looks like it's from a colleague or somebody that's trying to negotiate something or get something done with financing. The systems that we have in place are trained on millions of emails that can churn through the system to try and train them against that, to help the system catch when it's a spam or a bot or an ill-acting person trying to get information. Our networks use AI to protect themselves from attacks. So outside, we've got individuals that come in from other countries, even local actors that try to attack our network. And AI continually monitors and defends against those attacks.
Yeah, go
Please.
ahead. To be
Yes.
more specific, how it works is it learns about what normal looks like in our environment. So it constantly monitoring and training itself on what a typical day in Larimer County's network looks like. If it sees anything anomaly to that seems out of the norm of our baselines that have been built through the training of these systems, it immediately will alert Tom, who I think is behind me, and say, hey, you might have a problem, Tom. You should go look at this situation. We actually had one of these happen last week. We had an alert on one of our cold fusion older systems that, someone was poking around in there, and that hasn't happened. And I think the kind of requests that they were sending towards that website looked malicious in nature. And we were immediately able to respond to that alert and mitigate any potential risks that were associated with a potential bad actor trying to access some of our sensitive data. Go.
I look to my colleagues, but I guess I will step in. And that is, on this slide, we're paying an awful lot. Each year, our liability insurance increases, and at least a good chunk of that is related to cybersecurity. Is one of the potential benefits that if we get better at preventing the phishing attacks on our servers and our data, our databases, will that cause our liability insurance to go down or could contribute to that?
Maybe I'll try to answer it a slightly different way. It'll enable us to even get the insurance. So what we're seeing in the industry right now is if we don't have these practices in place, the underwriters can't actually write us a policy. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a trend, even though I think we're doing an excellent job getting all the best tools in and keeping them up. So far, it has not shown to be a reduction in cost, mostly because a lot of the peers that are getting hit and filing claims are driving up the cost of insurance. And so we're all in this together a little bit in government, but the reality is local government is a particularly valuable target. A lot of our smaller cities and counties are a little more vulnerable because they don't have quite the same systems in place that we have. But they still are an important aspect of our risk profile because we know anything's possible, and it only takes an employee potentially to click on something and provide a lot of information in order to create a claim. So we still think it's an important part of our portfolio, but I can lean behind and look back and make sure I didn't say anything wrong.
No, not at all.
Okay.
I think some of the tools we did put into place.
You want to come here?
were
And sir, for the record, you'll need to identify yourselves so we know that you're a real human being and not some type of
On my
A
phone.
bot.
My name is Tom Iwanski. I'm the cybersecurity program manager for Larimer County. Yeah, some of the tools we recently put into place were looked upon favorably by our, insurance brokers and providers, and as Mark said, reducing the insurance rates. I don't know if you can measure that, but just the ability to get insurance these days, cyber insurance is a feat. And we were favorably looked upon by our current carrier, and they renewed our insurance at least what our risk manager felt was a competitive rate.
Okay. You're welcome.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thanks for that, and I said this before, I'll say it again, folks like you probably don't sleep at night, so I can, because I know you guys are protecting us and at the helm, and I can't thank you enough, because I think we take it for granted, and a lot of folks in Larimer County don't realize how lucky we are to have such a phenomenal team that is really trying to stay ahead of this. And so knowing we have such a great and strong team and things change so much, and trying to keep our insurance and other things, is this an area, we've already put in some of this in our budget, I think, for this next year, for those paying attention to our budget and some of our increase in costs. This is one of those. Are we going to look to expand and have to do more with the emergence of more technologies and things and more areas for potential bad actors trying to get in? And I see it on social media and stuff, people just inserting misinformation, creating things, and the swatting incidents, and I know you're going to get to all those things, but is that, my question is now, is this something we will need to look forward to having more requests, or we should plan ahead for keeping this a robust or even increasing this area of the county?
Yeah, one thing I promised the commissioners is, we're going to squeeze as much life out of the resources we have and do the best job we have. We'll definitely come to you if we see that we're starting to struggle to keep up with the risks and the attacks that we're seeing. AI, the emergence of having to rely more on our cloud infrastructure providers to run computing in us is a concern of mine. I think at some point over the next few years, we'll probably reach the limits unless there's some magical technology that comes along that reduces the amount of cyber attacks we're seeing. But at the moment, it appears that the trend is not changing, and we'll most likely have to be thinking about over the next few years potentially some additional resources to keep putting ourselves in a good posture. But, we certainly have done a lot with the resources we've been provided. I'm very proud of that, and I think we'll continue. What we were provided from this last budget cycle, I think will give us a couple, 2-3 years of good leeway before we can reassess it.
Thank you.
This slide is just a high-level Zscaler that everyone uses for security, both on premise and when they're out in remote, like myself most of the time. What we've done here is it will monitor the type of websites that folks are visiting or using in their normal. Whenever they're connected, it just tracks and it catalogs them. It says what type of website, and we can look at both AI and machine learning websites because they have a category for that. The interesting piece here is there's a tool called Cortex, and for every time you bring up a video or you visit a website that has a video, that's a marketing AI. That's AI that's continually monitoring your behavior. And so it's just an interesting sight to see that, as expected, they're still watching us, they're still marketing to us, even when we're at work, even when we're engaging with the web. But if we look to these smaller pies, we see that Webtoon is there. That's something that our staff is using every day to improve their writing or rewriting, revising their content, very similar to ChatGPT, saying, hey, can you please rewrite this, or can you please condense content? Scribe How is a similar tool that will take, an article or content you put into it and create a how-to. It'll just like bullet point how-to guides. It'll take content in that way. And then, of course, we've got OpenAI and ChatGPT and other tools that are those generative AI tools. Followed by other services we tried to highlight and say it's either a marketing tool, another customer service chat tool that we're engaging with, But I just thought that's an interesting chart to show that as staff, we're continually engaging with AI, and that Cortex one tells me they're doing it even when we're not aware. Like it's monitoring our traffic, it's engaging with the content we see. So that's a high level.
I'm sure you've all searched a term on Google, and next thing you know, every time you go to YouTube or something, it's offering videos up for
Yep, or you say something out
the
loud.
thing you
and-
just searched on. And so these marketing, obviously what happens first, a way to market or get better targeted advertising tends to be where a lot of the financial support of technology goes first. And so AI is really contributing a lot to more accurate, targeted marketing campaigns, and that's why you're seeing a lot of the influx of these technologies in our search models.
Just to we are aware, and that's there.
Okay.
That's there. Some high-level examples from the BI team on some utility of both machine learning and AI. So last year, was it last year? I apologize. The BI team worked with Office on Emergency Management, their resilience plan. They did sentiment analysis of all the text surveys that were brought in. And that was very beneficial to that team in guiding the work in the resilience plan. Human Services, I believe there was some recent presentation.
Yeah, we actually have a representative from Human Services. I think in November you had a work session on the risk scores in child protection. And so that was an example of using predictive analytics to give the caseworkers additional data to inform their decision-making. And so do you recall that work session? So that's obviously work they've been doing with Auckland University for a number of years. They've been continually tuning those models to make them more accurate. They're trying to reduce any chance of bias being in those models. But that's been an iterative process working collaboratively with a number of other human services agencies and a university to try to get these tools so they actually provide value to the caseworkers. Ultimately, they're trying to inform their decision-making. The tools, again, as a reminder, don't make the decisions. They simply provide additional information so more informed choices can be made by the caseworkers in the middle of analyzing a lot of different information sources. So this is one of many that they use, but I think it's dramatically increased their ability to make good informed decisions. So.
We've highlighted a few others, and we definitely don't have to dive into each one of these. It's just it's a survey that it's not just one department, but it's the sheriff, it's criminal justice, it's HR, FTA, or the service desk. We did some work with the service desk ticket routing internally for HR or for IT. But this is just a small sample. I feel like you're drawing a little bit out on where we're currently using AI and BI specifically using it to improve our services, improve service delivery.
What does BI stand for?
Sorry about that. Business intelligence. And that's part of, that group worked within IT, and now it works with Josh Fudge's strategic team.
Yeah.
So one of the examples you give is around the patrol areas. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because up until then, it's really about providing data so that caseworkers can go in and know where to look or know what to pay attention to. But this one, I think, really changes maybe how we do business, not just what we have access to quickly.
Sure. So the dispatch and how data is fed through there's a lot of information that can sometimes be left to the side. But by cataloging all the dispatch calls, where the information comes in, times of day, times of month, the BI team took on a lot of that data and started to work to align or better staff for both efficiency, to put people in the right place at the right time as far as those patrolling agencies.
So in the old days, that would have been creating a chart, looking at how many people were called in when. It would have been as good as the day you did it, and then maybe not effective anymore. But this kind of stuff allows them to look at their scheduling every time they do a shift bid, perhaps, or something like that to be more
Or
effective.
real time.
I think the other thing about my understanding of what happens is you get kind of attached to the shifts and what your work product is. And so by presenting the data to the patrol teams that shows that, really we need to be present in these areas at these times of days because the system is predicting you wouldn't think a system has to predict that the Mulberry Corridor is going to have incidents, but it's able to predict what time of day and when they should have additional resources there. So it did help inform the sheriff's office when they were trying to adjust their patrol schedules, which impact people's lives as employees. And so by having the data and having the good information, it was able to enhance the ability to make changes in how they do patrols, and more meet the needs of the community and have resources available at the locations they should be when the chances were increasing, when the systems were saying you're more likely to have an issue. I know they're doing this also in some of the other areas like the ambulance services and things. You'll often see ambulances docked in certain areas of the county. A lot of that came from analysis they did to determine it was cheaper to have an ambulance stage maybe in Old Town, Fort Collins, than to dispatch them from the hospital, because the chances of having an incident response was like 90% during certain areas on the weekend. And so as a community, we're starting to use these to actually provide more efficient services to the residents and get our response times faster also. So that's kind of an example of that.
So this is where we get to the risks part. So we'll be moving along. We're at 11 o'clock right now. So risks of AI, or specifically this generative AI space. So when we have these conversations, and we've had these conversations both at Seagate, which is our Colorado IT group for local government, I have these conversations a lot with colleagues. But for me, it's easy to try to remember what are some bad things to think through when it comes to generative AI. And things that come up are bias, ownership, or who owns the content that it creates. Is it true? Are we being transparent with how these things work? And finally, we talked a little bit about this, but the security. Like, is it secure, or is it creating an insecure environment by having these tools? So we'll go briefly through each of these, and we can kind of converse on each one of these points. So as an example, if you go to one of these systems and you type in, give me a portrait of a successful person, it's 99 times, out of asking that question, it's usually a white male person that it's presented, which hits upon two biases right off the bat. But those are the most prevalent things. There's also many other examples of bias in these systems. I showcased another example here that from 2014 to 2017, Amazon was utilizing AI for their tech hiring. But
it would screen candidates.
Yeah.
It would do the initial screening of applicants into their system. And it was inherently, because it was using trained data on who typically was hired into positions, it was screening out women as applicant candidates. And they discovered it, and they have corrected it, but it was a pretty big deal. So that can be a problem.
Yes. And one of the things that we're trying to do within our agency through equity, diversity and inclusion, we don't want our systems that we rely on to bring that back in or to introduce that. So we realize that we have to be very mindful with using these systems.
Yes, Commissioner.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so bias is one of my biggest concerns with AI.
Sure.
And I mean, it's only as useful as the information that it has. So what does it look like to sort of, with machine learning, to retrain a computer to say success can look like all these different things? I mean, is that laborious? Is our efforts being taken to do that?
Yes, 100%. And it's interesting is even a lot of these agencies, specifically OpenAI, their role is to really fight that bias or to try to fine tune the training data. Because again, you start with a sea of data, and you create this generative large language model, and then if you start identifying bias, then you have to retrain or retrofit it, but not over retrofit it, not push it too far one way or another. So that is continually, it's usually training the system, and it is a big topic, and that's why as we use the systems, we have to be mindful of.
I'll just add one other thing. A lot of what we're seeing is trying to build it from the data that you have curated yourself. And so if we're going to use county data, we've curated it, we've cleaned it, we know it's accurate. The problem is when we start using data that's just in the mass internet of data like ChatGPT is using, it's really hard to write out some of the biases in these systems because history comes into play. We're not trying to even, the other thing I think about a lot is, well, maybe you want to write in positive bias. If you're incentivizing certain aspects, like in hiring, if you're incentivizing more diversity in your workforce, you can actually incentivize the bias to allow more of those applicants through to the next round. And so I think this plays both ways. If we're curating the data ourselves, we have strategies and outcomes we're trying to influence, bias can actually play in our favor, as well as just being aware of it and having committees of engaged employees that we can trust and bring together in work groups to challenge our views on things. So we're also exposed to what the potential bias can be. And so those are some of the strategies that we're looking to employ as we go forward, is not just to rely on the technologies, but also teams of employees to really be talking about bias and trying to uncover where it exists in our systems.
Well, and especially because, I mean, in our work, when you're talking about criminal justice or you're talking about child protection, I mean, I understand the value of tools that can help people make decisions, but over-reliance on those tools can lead to really bad outcomes for people of color and lower-income folks in our communities. And maybe it's because I read, did you read Weapons of Mass Destruction or Atlas of AI, where there's like numerous examples of how it's been used to create inequalities in our communities and sort of keep people down in a way, not able to get credit, not able to, and so I guess, that's why for me, I mean, obviously transparency and security and people's data getting, manipulated and sold and moved around, but the bias in our work, I think, is one of the things that we have to be really careful about. And I think about the tool that we use to decide whether someone is at risk of recidivism. I mean, that's a person's life of they're either going to jail or not, they're going to have a high bail or not. And so I guess with our works, especially some of our work, we have to be so careful with this. Mm-hmm. And I think that in just reading through some of this, I mean, having some policies that really help us to do that, so we're not over policing certain areas of our community, because that's clearly maybe where it's telling us to go, and yet it becomes, then certain people become over-policed. I won't go on, but, you understand what I'm saying.
I think we agree with you. I think this is the biggest conversation we're having in our government collective groups. I think our role to be fair and impartial in terms of how we deliver services puts us in a really interesting place. And this is probably the area I'm most concerned about also, so hopefully that helps you think that most of us that are involved in dealing with trying to figure out how to manage this as we move forward, this is our number one priority, to see if we can get a handle on the bias that exists in these systems.
Yeah. So, again, go through briefly, there is a huge lean on who owns the content once you put it in the system. Like, there's all these, like Getty Images, like all of a sudden Getty Image, the little water print starts showing up in some of the generative content, or a picture of the Joker and it actually returns a copyrighted picture of the Joker. So there's a lot of unknowns in who owns the content that's generated from these systems. If you're a Stephen King fan and the system has read every Stephen King novel, and you say, create a story like Stephen King, does Stephen King have a say in who owns that content? So ownership is a big deal that we have to be
I'd say just
mindful
one
of.
thing we're trying to build into policy. If you're not setting your configurations right up in a lot of these systems, if you upload, let's say, a document and ask ChatGPT to rewrite it for you to make it more readable, once that content is ingested into their engine, they now have it potentially, and it might pop up from other searches people make. And so county data needs to be protected. If we're going to load information up into these engines, there's ways to ensure that we're the only ones that can make changes, and it doesn't get sucked into the mass engine for others to access, if it's especially sensitive information.
Oh, of course.
Also, I think, and I'm trying to remember where I had this conversation, but recently where there was a contest for a art submission or a sculpture submission, and we had to now write in there that it could not be submitted by artificial intelligence. It had to be, you have to put in those parameters. And so I think also, just having that RFP out, you just kind of, it's out there, and then it just proliferates. And so I think, these conditions of trying to have to put that in the directions like this it cannot be artificially intelligently AI generated, was an eye opener to me. And I think that is something that is going to be continually, need to be thought of. And then also, I think that, you wonder, content of even, students, and they're trying to use, the youth are using more technology, and you wonder how this is steering them in a certain direction. Who's influencing what they're looking at, where they want to study, and where they're going. And so I have lots of wild thoughts about this, about the dangers. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because as I said, we had some pretty big conversations with some federal leaders, and it was certainly eye-opening, and I'm really glad we're going to talk about policy today. So.
Yep. So we'll just fly through. Hope we'll get to some and policy. Most of it, what we're getting to is we're giving you examples, but we're trying to align the policy to what the things is. What are we trying to avoid? Like whether it's bias or the problems we see with truth and transparency. Real quick example, and I'll just do the one on the right. With the lawyer who was suing another, and he asked ChatGPT to provide him some cases, so he cited those cases, and they turned out to be, they didn't exist. The judge was not pleased with him citing cases that did not exist, because he asked ChatGPT to bring the cases forward, and ChatGPT is very helpful to a fault. It will create things for you on the fly. So we realized that truth and transparency, understanding when you ask for something, that there always has to be a mindful that it could be fictitious, it could be made up, and it's something that has to be thought through before you utilize any content provided by the tool. And last, we talked a little bit about security. We've already touched on this, but we've talked through the idea of someone phishing, sending you phishing email, and then there was spear phishing, where they address you and they maybe mention the restaurant you went to a month ago. Now we're talking on an industrial level, the ability for this system to adapt, to know who you are, what type of day you engage with your email. And one of the things we talk about is we have a lot of correspondence from the commissioners for public open record that are out there. So that your responses, they're out there for people to see. And just thinking through, and again, I don't want to scare, but just realize that a lot of our content is out there. A lot of our voices are on this call right now. So one example that we could show is, let's just say that Lori Lopez gets a phone call. And let's see who it is, first off. Well, it's Mark Pfaffinger.
Or is it?
Or is it? So,
hello, Lori. This is Mark Pfaffinger. I need to have the entire broadband budget allocated to the Innovations and Insights team, specifically Gregg Turnbull. Also, I am giving up fly fishing for good, and I am very excited that the Kansas City Chiefs continue their march to the Super Bowl, not because of the team or football, but I am a huge Swiftie. Taylor's Eras Tour is my jam.
So that was me. I took his voice from our CIO forum, and from that point on, I could write anything.
Loaded it into a software that learned my cadence, it learned my voice, it figured out when do I pause. Then he typed commands, he typed text in and said, create this text from that voice that you just got with training from. And it produced a fairly realistic version of myself. If you receive this in voicemail, because voicemail is a little bit condensed also, these become kind of believable. And so one of the takeaways I'm trying to remind people is that if something seems a little out of ordinary or out of character, we're getting to the age where we almost can't believe anything. And you have to validate it in person or through a extra phone call to your colleague saying, hey, it's not unbelievable that I could potentially be deep faked by something where you could take a voicemail of Lorenda or another elected official who could be sending you voicemails that some third-party actor is trying to create tension between people in a political realm. And so this is not hard to do. The tools are readily available out there on the internet. And so it's something we all have to be mindful of as elected officials and as people serving the public, that this may become more of a threat to us going forward.
Yep.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, last piece is just this human element that as the county, as we start to lean in on these tools, and they are very beneficial, that we don't want to lose our humanity. And I think when you mentioned empathy and on the other side of this, it's like we can lean on these systems and try to take that piece out of it and say, write me a letter or do this for me and jump out there. But if we forget that what this system's trying to do, like as an example on this letter, writes this really nice letter saying, hey, we interviewed a lot of people, we really, really liked you, but then it says like, say something personal about the candidate, like in a template. It's really easy to let those things slip through the radar as we're sending a lot of these or leaning on the technology. So we can't let that go. We have to be very mindful of the work we do, that when we engage, we represent and not lean on AI systems. So we're to part 4. We're on our way. We've only got 15 minutes left, but that's where we talk a little bit about guidelines policy training. We did bring up some scary things, addressing the fear. So I've given a couple other examples like electricity we were very scared of electricity, scared of moving fast in a locomotive, scared of computers, and even of the polio vaccine. He had to do his family before anyone would even trust him. He gave that shot to his family. So when we look at AI or generative AI, there's going to be fear, and especially from people that are unaware of like the capabilities, or they hear these terrible things that happen online. And we just have to, there's all these fears. We also have to realize that this impact is continuous. Like you mentioned that Google already prompted you and said, hey, are you ready to start using this tool? ChatGPT is readily available to, like we mentioned the youth, they're much more likely to jump on board and use these technologies. But it's not just that, it's our phones, it's our TVs. There's so much, you'll see this sparkle start to show up in Zoom, for example. Zoom can generate content for us. When we're starting to type to somebody, it'll say, hey, let me take care of that for you. Let me write this email, or let me write this resolution. I've had it rewrite some resolutions just to test it. But it's here. It's here now, and something that we have to be available. So we have this fear, and we have this technology that's now becoming embedded in the tools we're already using. And that's where we have to start to think, like, how do we do this as an agency? And I just try to think of things like we have to be aware, which is part of this presentation. Bridging is thinking through where we're already using AI and where we could possibly use AI. Like each department has something they need to do where we need to bridge our technology to that need, or that what these departments are services they're providing. We have to be curious about these technologies. We have to jump in and start using them to understand them. And the last part is the most important, is the discernment that we're going to lean on both the board, the staff that we have, and what we have here is the need for. We'll skip the LC. We already showed you one of our AI. I have a chatbot that's based for Larimer County, which we already talked about earlier. But we talk about policy. We talk about guidelines. So what we've done as Larimer County is we've partnered with 140 other agencies, including Boston, Seattle, the city of San Jose. And we're working on those policies, on guidelines, on templates, on how we engage with vendors that have AI built into their systems. And we realize that the bias, the accountability, that all these things take front seat when we're engaging with the public, when we're making decisions. So that's the where we're doing the work. two of these agencies have kind of put forth the gold standard as far as like what we're looking at as the policy and the guidelines. San Jose has these really great guidelines for AI use, and I've included those, and they're very dense. There's a lot there, so I just included so you can take a quick look at those, as well as Seattle's policy. Again, there's a lot to think through, but those high level of bias and ownership and truth, security, those are the things that we need to address. And also, how do we provide service going forward when AI is in our very near future?
I think it would be unrealistic to assume that we can stop this wave from coming. And so our approach right now is being, let's try to stay ahead of it. Let's try to put some policies and guidelines in place in order to start easing ourselves into this new world of technology that exists. We've been talking a lot about this with Lorenda. We assume, but I'd love to hear if the board supports our moving forward with adopting a policy and guidelines around these technologies so we can give a little bit of a protective bumpers to our employee to know what's okay and what isn't to do, knowing that this is going to require a little bit of modification. We're looking at the policy and guideline approach because the guidelines we can adjust fairly rapidly as we learn more, and as issues come up, we can rewrite those fairly quickly. We want the policies to be a little more high level in terms of kind of those larger guardrails of what's acceptable and what engagement and approvals you might need in order to use these technologies in areas that are a little more sensitive, especially if it involves sharing county data into these tools that exist in the cloud in order to get responses back. I think that's a legal issue that we need to make sure that we put in policy that, departments just can't go and freely share our data without some sort of guardrails in place. So we would appreciate some input on that.
So before we go there, just to clarify in plain language, your question is direction from us, feedback regarding developing county policies and guidelines. Is that correct?
Correct.
Commissioner Shadrack McNally, I believe you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I really want to thank you all for bringing this presentation today. It's something that I've been bringing up with Lorenda and saying, hey, we need to talk about this. And I have been thinking we need to get a policy and get way ahead of this. I've read some data that says there's some kind of human element, or that AI is going to evolve so fast it'll be really hard to discern between human and real, or by 2029. I mean, this is coming very quickly, as I understand it. And I don't even think we even know out there what the capabilities are. So I'm getting to my comments, Commissioner. I just want to say that this is something I really would like to see us put more than just guardrails on, but I think we need to really get ahead of this. I think that if let's say we're all wrong and they're just all pros, and we do some regulations or some guidelines to really be proactive and very conservative about some of this, especially when there's so much sensitive data, I don't think everyone will be like, yeah, okay, whatever. But if we don't do something now, and it gets way ahead of us, and it impacts, then we're all going to care, because it's going to really impact a lot of folks. And also, I don't know what that looks like when we deal with other agencies like the state or federal or other counties may not have the same kind of phenomenal resources we have with our team. If that has to also be kind of thought of when some of those policies, we're living in the age of algorithms and artificial AI things, but I think we really have to remind ourselves that the county is here about helping people, and we can't take that human element out of it. And so I really like to make sure that also is kind of a guiding principle, not that we're still trying to, we use this to help us be more efficient and help our employees do jobs better by taking some of the, and providing better data analysis. But I want to be really careful that we don't lose that human interaction, that human element. So I am all for some kind of policy. I would probably be on the side of a very proactive and strong policy, because I do think if we don't do something now, I think in a few years we're going to regret that we didn't kind of jump ahead of this. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, I'm definitely are definitely supportive of developing a policy. Just in briefly kind of looking through some of the guidelines and policies, I think these provide a great place to start. The information from San Jose, and then, who's the other?
Seattle.
Seattle. So that seems like a great place to start. And I think in conjunction with that, some training, talking about, making sure that people understand the ethics of some of this work and some of the problematic pieces as well, so we can hopefully prevent some of that kind of stuff from happening. And that can maybe happen under the guidelines, but honestly, having, not just having it on paper, but I think really talking to folks about, some of the implications of what could happen. And then just, I guess, keeping in mind sort of, if we're inputting things, there is, so AI can only, it can only do what it's learned, what it knows. And so somebody has to put that information in, right? And what does that look like? And that comes to the privacy issues, but it also sort of comes to, are we tasking staff to do that? And is that become sort of this menial job that somebody has to do? Is this data, all this data input and what does that look like for, people that we employ? So it's not functioning on its own. It's only as good as what's put in there. And so being careful about what we put in, and then also being conscious of the fact that, who's doing that work.
Right.
And what, is that, if we want to relieve people from some of the strain of the job, there's still a piece that involves this piece that it is somewhat, not as, I don't know. I think what I'm saying is that just that there does have to be people behind the scenes sort of making sure that this is happening. And so are we, how are we taking care of those folks that are maybe doing that work?
I would say most of the systems mine large data sets in an automated way. It's kind of the onesie twosie where you're uploading your information and having it give you results back. But at this point, at least, a lot of the systems I've seen, rarely do they have like manual intervention of loading information. It's some sort of automated system.
Yeah.
So then
but-
the check has to be even more careful on that, because, it isn't being loaded by someone who understands that information or how to interpret that. So even with a phone number, like, I don't know the cadence of a phone number, right? There's like that, just, so I guess just proceed with caution. I guess is my message.
Okay.
Thank you, colleagues. So I'll offer my 2 cents. First of all, yes to your question. I basically agree with what I understood my colleagues to say regarding caution, good engagement with staff, with our organization, our team members. Training, I think, is important, et cetera. A couple of considerations, questions I would ask you to keep in mind. Certainly issues related to confidentiality, especially in the human services space. I'd want to better understand how we're protecting, if we're dealing with child welfare, how we're protecting confidentiality. I think that's important. When you mentioned about San Jose and Seattle as being the, quote, gold standard, I'd like to know who was involved in developing. Was it an inclusive process that addresses some of the things we've raised today about bias, and who's doing the algorithms? I don't even know if we're doing algorithms anymore. I seem to recall when algorithms were the thing, and I suppose this is the next generation, the folks who were developing those algorithms, that's where they came up with an image of none of us would comport with as far as what's successful. So I think I'd like to know the gold standard, how that was developed. And finally, and that is, I think it's important to better understand our process. How are we going to develop these guidelines, these policies and guidelines? What is the time frame? And will how will we make sure we get all the perspectives? For example, if bias and issues related to inclusivity and diversity and equity are important at some point, would we present these draft policies, guidelines to our equity, diversity, and inclusion board? I assume we would. And also, would we, some level of collaboration with our other partners in the community, in Larimer County municipalities, folks out in the community. So that's, yes to your question. I hope you'll keep in mind some of the questions, considerations that I raised that I think we all probably agree with. And I think to close us out, other than to say thank you very much for your extraordinary work, I would turn to our esteemed county manager in about 20 seconds. Anything you'd like to share?
I guess I'll just say thank you for your time. This is a complicated issue, and this is the first piece of these conversations. We will come back with many, many more before a policy is adopted. And so I appreciate that the department is putting this kind of attention on this. We know that it's coming, and it's good to have rules about it.
Thank you, Lorinda. Thank you, colleagues. At 11:30 a.m. and a few milliseconds, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.